You guys, it's going to be a slightly different video today concerning the fact that I've already done this video technically. I did a Kill Rationalism Part 1, and I was texting my own buddy Jeremy from high school, and I playfully accused him of being a rationalist. And then I sent him my videos, which in turn caused me to go back and watch those videos, and I realized this is not my best work. It's a bunch of half-made points that would later be made whole, but only after a bunch of tangents. It took me 6.5 minutes to get to the point, and it's too long for me to send to like an atheist and them actually watch. So we're going to be cutting through all of that. I'm going to be probably taking that video down. There's nothing inherently wrong with it. It's just not my best work, and I think this will be better. And I've decided to make this a series in addition to my Jean Gebser's Seeing Through Gebser series. We'll have the Seeing Through Gebser series, and then we'll have Kill Rationalism, which is essentially me explaining how rationalism is destroying our modern society in 2025. So without further ado, let's get into it. So rationalism is ultimately the idea that whatever is considered true by means of rational thought is exclusively true. Rationality, in turn, is a mode of thought, which in essence is a particular way of bringing objects in the world into relation with each other. It relies on directed judgment as opposed to qualitative valuation. So let's say I'm walking down the street and I pick up a piece of gold that I found and I say, wow, this is amazing. This is beautiful. It's incredible. It's priceless. Look, it's priceless. And then my friend who's walking with me just sort of looks at me like an idiot and goes, no, dude, it's worth $100. That right there is the difference between qualitative valuation and quantitative directed judgment. But as I said, it relies on directed judgment. So take Michelle Obama. If I say Michelle Obama is 9 feet tall and 900 pounds, the direction would be towards Michelle Obama, and I would render a judgment. She would either exist as I described her, or she wouldn't. Now, of course, in this case, it's wrong. That's a very easy way into rational thought. So another limitation of rational thought is as limited to what is quantifiably measurable and consciously known. I'm going to repeat for emphasis. Rationality is limited to what is quantifiably measurable and consciously known, as opposed to what is quantifiably measurable and consciously unknown, what is quantifiably immeasurable and consciously known, what is quantifiably immeasurable and consciously unknown, and matters of qualitative evaluations. So those four things that I just listed are incredibly powerful, if not more powerful, aspects of the world and the human condition than mere rationality. But rationalism says, no, all these things I just listed either don't exist or shouldn't exist or both. That's rationalism. That's bullcrap. You don't want that. So rationality was ultimately born from the discovery of perspectivity, or that is objectified space. Now, it might seem odd, but I'm going to list out some other discoveries that were made during this time. So, or the time being around the Renaissance. Now, of course, the ancient Greeks had a bit of a rationality. That's what we call the pre-perspectival phase. But the perspectival phase, that would come around the 1500s, around the Renaissance. And of course, that's when the Enlightenment happened. So we have perspective in painting by Da Vinci, of course, and technical drawings or blueprints, also by Da Vinci, the god of perspective. At the same time, we had the Copernican revolution. You would not have been able to do that without an objectified understanding of the spatial world. The scientific revolution, same thing. Columbus's discovery of the New World, that's a more obvious one. The geometrical revolution from 2D to 3D, that's easy, right? That's right there. We're going, oh, by the way, perspectivity is the ability to render 3D objects or images on a 2D flat surface. That's what perspectivity is. I apologize for not saying that. And you can see this here with geometrical revolution from 2D to 3D. That's what it is, perspectivity. The ability to render 3D objects or images on a 2D flat surface. Objectified realistic space. And of course, we have the Enlightenment. So if I look at Las Meninas by Velázquez, everything in that is perspectively correct. It's realistic to the eye. That's what that means. And so in philosophy, now, the other ones that might seem obvious, like science, like, okay, like a neutron's not a proton, and that's not an electron, okay, and you can see that with geometry, okay, but philosophy, it seems a bit weird, but think about it. So let's take like the is-ought gap in philosophy. What is versus what we should do. We have is on one hand and should on the other. What does space have to do with anything? The space is in between. The space is in between. It has divided two concepts and imposed space on them, which will bring us into my next point, which is the specific way rational thought brings objects in the world into relation with each other. Now, this is the big stuff. So it's essentially triangular thought. As I said earlier, Rational thought takes the whole of anything it's considering, physically or metaphysically, and sectors or divides that which is quantifiably measurable and consciously known, as opposed to all the other stuff I listed. Here's how it brings objects into relation with each other specifically. Posits one thing that is quantifiably measurable and consciously known against another of the same that is also quantifiably measurable and consciously known in a dualistic fashion, meaning that meaning is conferred by how the pairs are different, how the objects under consideration are different or dissimilar, rather than a polar sense like the yin and the yang, where the black and white balance and feed off one another. They are similar. That's how their meaning is conferred, not with rationality. A is A, and A cannot be A and B at the same time. Things are dualistic. So we establish one, then another. It's quantifiably measurable, consciously known. These form the base of a triangle, and then we invoke the third aspect of measuring thought, a thought that measures, analyzes, and calculates to posit or formulate a directed judgment, usually either by privileging one of the two or by creating a synthesis. There's two big problems. One, as I've said earlier, we have limited everything. So all those quantifiably immeasurable qualitative valuations, all that's gone. So we're only focusing on a part of the thing. That's a big problem. Another big problem, we have the one, two, and then the third aspect of measuring thought. The problem is whatever conclusion you come to, whatever directed judgment you formulate can only be understood by positing its opposite and then restarting the process. Let me see if I've got the pen here. So we have, not the best here, we have this little triangle, right? So these two, so we have is, or it could be essence versus appearance, right? Or whatever, it could be incorrect or correct. And then we invoke the third aspect of measuring thought to synthesize the two. Problem is, this can only be understood, the third aspect can only be understood by positing this here. So we also posit its dualistic antithesis, and then we start the process. We restart the process. You are compelled to further divide. So we establish a thesis, and then we establish an antithesis, and then we synthesize. Philosophy students know where I'm going with this. So the two big problems is it's inherently limited, and no matter what answer you come to, you are compelled to keep dividing, because whatever answer you come to must necessarily be understood rationally by positing its dualistic antithesis and restarting it over and over again. So let's use some examples. So we have Aristotle's golden mean. Let's take courage, for example. The excess, so we're considering courage. On one hand, we'll do our thesis. We'll do the excess of courage, which is rashness. Then we posit its antithesis. It doesn't, by the way, when you're positing the binaries, it doesn't necessarily have to be its antithesis. It just has to be dualistic. It's just often its antithesis. So say, okay, the excess is rashness. What's its antithesis? I guess we'll call it its deficient nature, which would be cowardice. So both of these are extreme, and generally speaking, we don't want this. So what do? We invoke the third aspect of measuring thought to synthesize the two. Aristotle says there's a golden mean here. So that's classic rational thought. 1, 2, 3. Stick with Aristotle. We have the past. We have the future. These are dualistic. They negate one another. And we invoke the third aspect, according to Aristotle, and we live in between. In between. That's a spatial. Now remember, when you see in between assigns a spatial characteristic or attribute to what is being considered. And of course, if rationality was preceded by the discovery of perspectivity, that is objectified space, it makes sense that you would find in a bunch of rational thinkers spatialized aspects or characteristics in their thought, like Kant when he says, behind the image of the world that humans see is the thing in and of itself. Behind it, that's space, right? Rational thought, there we go. What else? We also have Plato's essence versus appearance. So we have my phone. What makes it a phone? Its essence, what it does, or its appearance, what it looks like. What do? We invoke the third aspect of measuring thought to posit a directed judgment. We privilege, in Plato's case, essence. This is the metaphysical age, or the logocentric age, that Derrida would go on to deconstruct. He's really deconstructing the mental conscious structure. He just doesn't know it. Then, of course, in other philosophy, we have thesis, antithesis, synthesis. That's Hegel, where all of human history is sort of cycled through this lifespan. Then we have Kant's antinomies. This is interesting with Kant too, because Kant did the Critique of Pure Reason, and when he posits the antinomies, what's that? That's the binaries here. So he said, look, reason is insufficient when it comes to ideas of metaphysical truth. So the soul, which is quantifiably immeasurable, which does exist, just because it cannot be put on a table doesn't mean it doesn't exist. The laws of logic cannot be put on a table; they exist. The soul, God, the beginning of the universe, all that stuff. Kant is saying is that their reason for, or Verstand, the understanding, forms these binaries and then invokes reason to reconcile the two, but it can't. So let's take the infinite versus finite beginning of the world. Well, rationally speaking, the law of cause and effect means that there must have been a beginning. There's no way it could be infinite, so we can already toss that aside. But the problem is, whatever beginning it is, you're always going to be able to ask, well, what caused that? Well, what caused that? And what caused that? So reason won't be able to do it. Now, why was reason, according to Kant, unable to adequately answer these questions? Because it's shifted from areas of quantifiably measurable and consciously known to matters of that are quantifiably immeasurable and consciously somewhat known, maybe known. It depends on what you're doing, where you're at. So there you go. And then any sort of this either or thinking, that's rational thought. So it's either true or false. Incorrect, correct. Right, wrong. That's either or thinking. Now, here's another problem. One of the best things, I'll say this, one of the best things about rationality is it causes space. Space can be a good thing. Now, as I said, if rationality was preceded by the discovery of an objectified space, an objectified world, a realistically perspectival world, the object, there must be a corresponding subject to perceive the object. That is the ego, or the sense of I in philosophy, which I define it as the ability to perceive and to be aware you're perceiving. And then, of course, you have the psychological ego, the me, I want this. I'm a person. I'm a real human being. Okay, so let's take now rationally used effectively, that distance is balanced, right? So instead of when I'm angry, instead of just kind of automatically externalizing that anger and beating people up and ruining things and burning stuff down, rationality, the subject that corresponds to the object, rises. And now I can say, I am angry. M. Odysseus, right? That didn't always happen before. So I have space and distance that can allow me to calm down and do my CBT and all that crap, right? That's efficient rationality. That's great. What happens if that space goes too far? So, as I said, there's distance between the subject and the object. The problem is when the subject, like in phenomenology, completely divorces itself from the object in a material, literal sense, it simply loses any sort of connection to what is being perceived. And you can see this more clearly when you see that the object and subject become one. So let's say I'm doing let's say I'm in therapy and I'm doing some self-analysis. I'm doing some analysis of my emotions. Maybe I'm a little angrier than I need to be and I want to improve that. Okay. So now the subject and object have become one. So now I am, instead of directly engaging or acting within the world, I am thinking about my direct engagement or action within the world. That's not a problem, but it can be a problem when taken too far. That's rationalism. What happens then is when you retreat to this sort of world of thought, this abstract conceptual world of thought that rationality lives in, as opposed to, rather than in a polar sense, rather than letting the external world, the facts of the external world, feed your abstract conceptual rationalizations, you've separated them and you're saying, no, rationality is better. This world is superior to here. So what happens is you get self-consciousness, you get paralysis by analysis, you get a complete overwhelming feeling of anxiety, and you get all these terrible things because the subject has gone too far. It has been privileged and thrown off the balance between subject and object. It has divided things so much that there is simply no way any unity can be conferred on what has been divided, because that is how rationality operates. I'm actually going to make that point next. So rationality establishes distance, or more accurately, space, that can be a good thing, but when taken too far, when the abstract mental conceptual world decides that it's too good for the direct physical world, now we got a problem. Now we have removed ourselves from any sort of accurate sense data, because we're not dealing with reality directly. We're dealing with models of reality, a reflection or representation of reality. So when I'm being self-conscious, I'm not dealing with reality. I'm dealing with an idea of reality. I'm dealing with an image of my reality. And of course, it's like when an engineer has all these great models and he wants to build this great thing and then he tries it and it doesn't work. So you got to be careful. It's important to be self-conscious to an extent, but you never want to go too far. You always want to bring that in balance. That's a real problem with rationalism. That separation of subject and object. Once subject becomes object, or once the object or subject becomes so separated from the object, now we get anxiety. Now we get self-conscious. That is useless, by the way. Useless. It's not going to help you. Um, it's just not going to help you. What else? All right, we'll go into the divisive character of rationality as is evident by our use of rational numbers. Have you ever wondered why we use rational numbers? Because rational numbers can be divided. Now, of course, hopefully you notice as I'm explaining all of this, rationality divides. It divides is from ought or should. It divides utilitarianism from deontology, and that in turn divides from virtue ethics. These ideas have been decoupled, and if they've been divided, the space is in between them, right? Okay. Same thing with rational numbers. The divisive character in rationality is wholly underappreciated. The preceding ways of doing things, one of the best things about myth or rationality is it confers psychic unity. But every abstract conceptualization in which you're constantly dividing, you are creating a little slit. You're creating a division in the psyche itself. So taken too far, and if we just divide, what happened? Well, what happened on the physical world? We divided, literally everything, including the atom bomb, or the atom, which in turn created the atom bomb. So now we can blow ourselves up. Now we can end the species, but no one really stopped because it's rational, so it must be true, and there's no other way of doing it. We have no qualitative balance here because rationality can't take into account qualitative balance or valuation. So it's a problem. So the same disaster that happened on the physical realm with the creation of the atom bomb and the nukes and all that stuff, that same thing has happened on the metaphysical realm. Now no one can justify anything. Religions and spirituality isn't taken seriously. Everything is hyper analyzed and hair split until no one can render any sort of directed judgment on anything at all. And as a matter of fact, we're all establishing that distance instead of just knowing things, instead of just knowing the world or knowing that I exist in the world. Rationality and the subject inherent within it has detached itself from that. So now it's gone self-conscious. Now we can never know anything because we're all too busy. Instead of living our epistemological faculties and just kind of presupposing them and working with them automatically, now we're analyzing them and hair splitting them and picking them apart, and now we can't do anything. So I would argue this explains a lot of our art too. Art is fueled by great metaphysics. All of that's been deconstructed, and now we get terrible art. So let's do a quick summation. So rationality operates on directed judgments. It's limited to what is quantifiably measurable and consciously known. It is limited to what is quantifiably measurable and consciously known. Big point. It engages in triangular thought, so it establishes one thing that's quantifiably measurable and known against another in a dualistic sense, and then invokes the third aspect of measuring thought to synthesize the two, or to privilege one of the two, and really to form a directed judgment. That's how it operates. Problem is, whatever directed judgment you finally come on to, you will necessarily have to posit its antithesis or its opposite and just restart the point. And now, no longer are we conferring clarity or things that just make sense. Not only are we being obscure, not only has rationality gone too far, so now things are no longer clear, but obscure, they become absurd. And that's what this series is going to be about, pointing out the absurdities of rationality taken too far. Determinism, no spiritual other side, no religion, no soul, no myth, no anything, no romanticism. It's absurd. And some of the conclusions that they make on pure logic is just absolutely wild to me. But that's pretty much it. Yeah, it's inherently limited, and you're never ever going to be able to come to a definitive conclusion, because whatever you come to, you're just going to have to compare it to its opposite and then restart the process. So rationality is great. It must be qualitatively balanced. Just like it goes the other way. It goes the other way. If we start doing this pure emotion and I just give in to all my emotions, well, a lot of those are going to be negative, and that's going to be just violent. We're going to be genociding each other. We're going to be killing each other. We're going to be ruthlessly torturing people. I don't want that. I don't want that at all. Rationality gives me that space to say, I am angry. Let me rationally do this. That's good. That's efficient rationality. Deficient rationality takes it too far. It tries to bully all other aspects of the human condition and the world that are either pre-rational, irrational, or irrational. Don't do that. Kill rationalism. Be a full human. Understand all aspects of the human condition. Respect all aspects of the human condition, and integrate them into a balanced whole. And when you make discernments in your real life, you know when to deploy what. I know when I'm doing a science class, it's time to be rational. When I'm making economic policy, it's time to be rational. When I'm doing just day-to-day stuff, I'm hungry, I want to go to the grocery store, I could either starve or I could eat. I'll eat. There you go. Rational thoughts. Starvation, full, boom. There you go. Do that. And no one's saying toss it out entirely. But don't go too far, because you're wrong. You're just simply wrong. And it's very frustrating. Watch the rationalists, who are arrogant as hell, walk around with their stupid little Richard Dawkins books and their little fedoras going, that doesn't make sense to me, so it must not be real. No, you're the one, perhaps you're the one to blame, not the world. So there you go. I mean, hopefully that was enough. And like I said, I'll be doing a series about this. So if there are other things that you're upset that I didn't really get to, don't worry. I'll be explaining these in more detail. I'm going to be explaining how the absurd conclusions of rationalism, like determinism, like all those things I mentioned, how they affect our world today. The divisiveness in our modern America, Western society. Yes, we are all individuals. We all have a trillion different political ideologies, and that is what has left us vulnerable to collectivism. So whether it be on the left or right, usually it's on the left, but it can be on the right too. Now, I want to say one final point, excuse me. Now we're going to remind ourselves, remember, the dualistic binaries, okay? So we have rationality. Now take a guess what you think is the opposite. It's not irrationality, it's irrationality. Now a rationalist exclusively holds on to this way of bringing objects in the world into relation with each other. Do you see the problem? They simply cannot even conceive of transcending to a rationality. They only view it as rationality or irrationality. That's a problem because, one, there's irrationality. Irrationality exists. Two, these are polar complements, not dualistic antitheses. So they're polar complements because both are aspects of the human condition that are not going away anytime soon. No matter how much you try to rationalize your irrationality away, it's never going to happen, my friend. It will manifest in negative ways. But you can see it, right? So we have rationality or irrationality. There is simply no other way of doing this, according to them. So we privilege rationality. Here's the problem. Because these are polar complements, not dualistic antitheses, what you have done is the seesaw. You've done the seesaw. You went down, and now the other comes up. So there is a reason why in the age of reason, we have the woke left, we have the beginning of the post-liberal right, or the woke right, if you want to call them that. We have communism, we have fascism, we have insanity, irrational nonsense. The rationalists have created your own worst enemy because you have not properly respected that aspect of the human condition. You have closed it off. You said, this is nonsense. There is nothing good that could ever come from this. And the only way we're doing is rationality. But the problem is, irrationality has been around for millions of years, whereas rationality has been around for what? 1,000? 1,000 maybe? At the very least, if we're doing the Gebser, irrationality has been around since 10,000 BC, at the very least. If you want to say pre-rationality was before that, okay, fine. The point is, irrationality is a more powerful aspect or potency of the human condition. And the more you try to rationalize away, the more you will create it. The more you will, in defeating your enemy, in attempting to defeat your enemy, you will strengthen your enemy, and that enemy will destroy you. So that is my video on rationalism. I hope you guys enjoyed it. I apologize if you left a comment on the first video, and I had to take that out, so I do apologize about that. But I hope you guys enjoyed this. I hope I explained it well enough. It's 30 minutes less than my other video, so that's good. And yeah, so please hang around for this series, and we will get to you, all right? Love you guys. Thank you.